Hey everyone, Sam Pearson here. This video continues our series in how to design a tabletop wargame. I'm showcasing my upcoming game, Black Death City, and today the focus is scenarios. So in my professional career, whilst working at the Warhammer design studio, I created lots of different scenarios or missions or battle plans for various games, some good and some bad. I've done scenarios for Warhammer 40,000. For example, I did all of the scenarios in Vigilus Defiant, which was a narrative supplement for 8th edition Warhammer 40,000. These were a lot of fun to design as we had lots of pages to work with and I had completely free reign, so I came up with all sorts of kooky scenarios such as evacuating planet nobles to an extraction zone in the midst of a Genestealer cult uprising. These were some of the first scenarios I designed whilst I was at Games Workshop, with the last probably being the Path to Glory scenarios in the Age of Sigmar 4th edition core book. These were a suite of scenarios that needed to be playable at different game sizes. We were really strapped for space with this book, so each needed to fit on exactly one page. I tried to fit as much flavour as I could within these limited dimensions. But there were also lots of scenarios in between, and they weren't always narrative play. I did the scenario for Spearhead, which I considered to be a match play scenario, and this one is interesting because it's the only scenario you use in Spearhead, so it has lots of variety baked into it. And I've also done scenarios that weren't presented on a page. For example, I designed the battle plan cards for Warcry, where the battle plan or scenario was determined by drawing 4 cards from different decks. You had the battlefield, the deployment, the victory, and the twist. You would randomly draw a card from each of these decks, and with 36 cards in each deck, and some causing you to draw additional cards too, there was actually over 3 million combinations in the core game alone. So before we get into this video, the one thing I want to stress is that there is no one correct way to design scenarios. They can take lots of different shapes and forms. They could be pages in a book, they could be a system of drawing cards, or something else completely. For example, in the game Moonstone, you drop a handful of D4 dice onto the table. These become the objectives. Where the dice land is where the objectives are, and the number upon them is how many turns it will take to dig them out of the ground. So there isn't a single right way to do scenarios, but that doesn't mean they should be an afterthought. How the scenarios work is crucial to figure out because it determines one of the most important aspects of your game. What must the players do to win? And not only that, as well as the victory conditions, there are a host of other things you need to decide, which all have big ramifications on your game's design. For example, how big should the battlefield be? This has an impact on the size of forces each player can field. How far away should the forces start? This impacts both the movement values and the range of weaponry. How many turns should a battle be? This impacts the overall length of your game and what sort of stories can be played out on the tabletop. So there is a heap of things to consider, making it a pivotal part of your game design. The right answers for your game will largely depend on what sort of wargame you are making. Is it a strategic tournament-focused game or an immersive narrative game? Is it designed to be played in under an hour, or are the scenarios meant to take 2 to 3 hours to resolve? I'm not going to pretend that this video has all of the answers, but hopefully it serves as a good starting point and helps you think over these important questions when it comes to your design. For me, I'm making a narrative skirmish wargame, Black Death City, and so my focus will be on making the best narrative scenarios that I can. In fact, I want to write the very best. Better than Mordheim, better than Necromunda, better than anything else you can think of. If I pull that off or not, well, I'll let you be the judge of that. But in this video, you'll get to hear me talk on scenarios, and in particular, what I think makes a good narrative scenario. How can we design scenarios that are better than anything that has come before? That's the challenge. I'll see you after the jump. Okay, so one of the first things I did was figure out the design space my scenarios would occupy. And here I mean the physical design space you have to work with. If you've been following along the series so far, the physical design space is not something we've really considered, as up until now we've been working on areas such as the core rules. But as we get into scenarios and faction rules, it begins to become much more important. For example, if your combat rules fill up 2.5 pages, you have a few options. You could leave it as it it is. It's what Dungeons and Dragons does, where sections constantly spill over and new sections begin midway down a page. However, it makes the book harder to navigate and looks a little ugly in my opinion. Alternatively, you could try and trim the rules down to 2 pages exactly, or you could flesh them out a bit, perhaps adding in some diagrams or using some art to fill the space. So here you can see we have a few options available, but with scenarios and later faction design, which will be the next video after this, you will start coming up against hard limits more and more. The most obvious example is with cards. If you run out of room, you can't spill over onto the next. That's it, you have to start trimming. For Warcry, which uses playing card sizes, I could fit up to 100 words onto each card, but no more. But even with pages in a book, it can be a good idea to set yourself a standard to work to. Yes, back in the day, scenarios used to spill across the pages, but as mentioned, I think we should try and avoid this. A lot of my time as a designer working on Warhammer was spent getting a scenario to fit exactly onto 1 page, or trimming down a unit war scroll so that it would fit onto half a page, and so on. So a good place to start is thinking about the physical space that you need. If you're using a card system, how many cards do you need to generate the scenario? Are they playing cards or are they tarot cards in size? If you are laying them out on pages in a book, how big are the physical pages? A4, A5? Will the scenarios be 1 page, half a page, or multiple? Once you can figure this out, it defines your word limit, which gives you a structured framework to design your scenarios under. Generally, tournament style missions or match play have fewer things going on. They often have symmetrical deployment, symmetrical victory conditions, and as such they need fewer words. More narrative style missions generally need a larger amount of space. Asymmetrical deployment or victory conditions, for example, might need double the space or more, because not only might it differ between the attacker and the defender, they might be more detailed too. For Black Death City, my goal is to give it a selection of rich narrative scenarios, some that can tell twisting and emergent stories. You might have picked up a slight tone of frustration when I talked about the narrative scenarios I did for Age of Sigmar 4th edition Path to Glory. While I am happy with these scenarios in general, and I'll talk about some details I'm not so keen on later on, it was definitely a struggle to get everything I wanted onto a single page, even a page of A4, and so I had to make many compromises in the design as a result. For Black Death City, I have the freedom to call all the shots. I really want these scenarios to sing, and so I'm going to give myself a bit more space. Each of my scenarios is going to be set out on a spread of A4, so 2 A4 pages in total. I didn't want to go any larger than this because keeping it to a spread allows the players to leave the book open during play with everything they need easily accessible in front of them. You might ask, why am I not using cards like Warcry? Well, one thing I liked about Warcry's system certainly was the amount of combinations that could arise. As I said before, there's roughly 3 million combinations in the core book alone, but it came with some real compromises too. The system was inflexible in a number of ways. Firstly, every card was limited to around 100 words, and saving space in one area didn't grant me space elsewhere. Secondly, as each card was siloed off from each other, they could never truly interact. For example, a twist card could never do something to treasure tokens, because treasure tokens only appeared on some victory cards, not all, and there was no guarantee you would draw one. With pages, I have a lot more flexibility. If I write a sparse victory condition, it grants me extra space to have a more complicated twist or deployment. In addition, I can have the individual elements interact with each other to a much greater degree. An asymmetric victory condition, e.g. an attacker and defender, might be easier for the attacker in some way, in which case I can use the deployment to offset this advantage, perhaps limiting when and where their reinforcements can arrive from. Still, I do like the idea of there being a large variety of scenarios, and I do like the thrill and surprise that drawing the cards gives you in Warcry. So I wanted to see if I could build at least a modest system within the confines of a 2-page spread for generating some combinations. Not 3.3 million, but even turning 6 scenarios into 36 would give the gameplay experience much more variety. So I came up with the following. Every scenario will be presented on a 2-page spread, and that spread will be divided as follows. On the left-hand side, I will cover all the rules for setting up the battlefield, deploying the forces, and the victory conditions. The right-hand page will be dedicated to a table of twists. Typically, this will be a D6 table, and the players will roll on the table at the start of the battle to determine which twist is used. This gets me a happy middle ground between the advantages of cards and the advantages of pages. Every scenario will have up to 6 variants due to the different twists. And as I'm planning for there to be at least 9 scenarios in the game, presuming that they all have 6 different twists, that gives me 54 combinations. Not bad. Okay, so that is my design space figured out. My next step was to establish what I call my gold standard, as in what do I think are the very best narrative scenarios already out there. This is a question you can ask yourself as well to help guide your design. If you're designing a wargame that focuses on the narrative, what in your opinion are the best narrative scenarios you've played? If it's a tournament style wargame, what are the best match play scenarios you've played? And if you're trying to strike a balance between the two, what are the best scenarios that strike that balance in your opinion? You get the idea. This is your gold standard and it helps guide your design in 3 ways. Firstly, it gives you a pool of inspiration to draw from. I'm looking forward to doing my take on scenarios that I think are classics. Secondly, it will help you identify some common themes that you can use. I'm going to try and look out for what ingredients it is in particular that make these narrative scenarios stand out from the rest, and how can I use those same ingredients in my own designs. And lastly, it will give you room to improve. We're going to be standing on the shoulders of giants and attempt to reach new heights. We will be giving a critical eye to our gold standard, asking what aspects of them could be improved, and then using that knowledge to improve our own design. So what is my gold standard for narrative scenarios? First things first, it's not Mordheim. I honestly find lots of the original Mordheim scenarios to be quite bland and often pointless. Let's look at one of its scenarios, Occupy, which I think best exemplifies this. This is a scenario that on first glance looks to be about capturing some buildings. The special rules read, the objectives is to capture D3 plus 2 of these buildings on the tabletop. Mark these buildings, starting with the one closest to the center of the table, working your way outwards to the next nearest building. A building is occupied if at least one of your standing models is inside and no enemy models are inside the building. So with our modern eye, what are we thinking here? You score points each turn for holding them. Each building has some treasure you can loot. No, not really. The winner is the warband that occupies the most buildings, and they are rewarded with +1 experience for the leader. That's it. This for me is a bad narrative scenario. There's nothing interesting happening on the battlefield. There's nothing exciting on the line, and it can take no twists or turns. Plus, there is no real reward for winning. +1 experience for the leader, whoop-de-doo. I am certainly not going to fight tooth and nail over these buildings, that's for sure. Now, Mordheim does have a few better scenarios than this, but it has many more in the same vein. Nothing interesting happening narratively or mechanically, and with no real incentives to win. Next potential for our gold standard is classic Necromunda. Now, I sung the praises of 1995 Necromunda and its scenarios in particular in my video on the game. I will certainly be using this as a trove of inspiration. For example, I have included in Black Death City a scenario called Street of Blood, which is my take on the scenario in Necromunda called The Hit. This scenario is about rivals trying to take down an enemy gang leader, and what I love about it is it creates tons of space for twists and turns to occur. For example, it is an unknown where the rest of the defenders' gangers may start. They could be with the leader on the other side of the battlefield or in reserve. Another place for twists and turns is in the aftermath of battle. If the attacker wins, they will either take over one of the defeated rivals' territories, or they will extort a load of credits from their income. Both are really rich narrative outcomes that will become memorable events in the campaign. So very, very cool, but I'm going to make Necromunda my silver standard. For my gold standard, I'm going to give it to Realm of Chaos Lost and the Damned and its scenarios, or detailed narratives as it calls them, which can be found on pages 62 onwards. By the way, you can buy both the Realm of Chaos books in Warhammer World Nottingham, and if you're curious as to which one you should get, it is definitely The Lost and the Damned. It is by far the superior book, and I would always pick it over Slaves to Darkness because of this section here called Narrative Campaigns. I should probably make a video about this at some point because it is so cool. I love it. Anyway, in my Necromunda video, I said one of the things that made Necromunda so revolutionary was that it fully curated the narrative experience for the players. This book came earlier, so it is a lot more loose. There is a lot more the players need to figure out themselves, and the game presumed there would be a game master to iron out any of grey areas or missing mechanics. Still, it had something close to what we would consider a scenario in modern wargaming, and that is in its detailed narrative section. Here we get 10 plot lines we can use for our games, and enough mechanics to be able to play through them with just a little bit of massaging. Let me showcase one of my favourites, which doesn't have a name. None of them have names, weirdly, but I'm going to call it the Sarcophagus. The warband of Champion A is travelling deep in the Forest of Shadows when by chance they come upon the ruin of an ancient temple. As the band moves into the glade to investigate, a figure suddenly steps from behind the colonnade and cries, "Halt, wastrel, this is none of your concern, be off or feel my wrath." It is Champion B. Beyond the broken doors of the temple, the rest of his warband are clustered around a huge stone sarcophagus, which they have dug from the floor of the temple. A calmly draws his weapon, and his followers close in around him. Meanwhile, B's followers take up their own weapons and prepare to join their leader. Battle is about to commence. Okay, that's a cool setup. I love the detail that the sarcophagus has been recently dug out of the ground. It then goes on to the rules, telling you how the battlefield should be set up. The table should be ringed with trees, leaving a clearing in the middle. The ruined temple stands in the middle of the clearing, surrounded by broken down walls and overgrown vegetation. During the battle, you can lift the lid off the sarcophagus. The first team to do so earns 5 victory points, which confusingly to modern readers isn't your points during the battle, it's more like 5 campaign points. And as you need 10 to earn your next chaos gift, that is a substantial reward and would definitely make both players keen to lift up the lid. And then once the lid is opened, the players roll to see what they find. Here are the options. 1. The contents of the sarcophagus have rotted down into a dangerous mutating dust which flies out to cover the models opening it. As a result, each develops an additional randomly generated chaos attribute. 2. The sarcophagus contains the bones of an undead champion of chaos who immediately rises to engage those who desecrate his tomb. The champion has a randomly determined chaos weapon which may be taken if he is defeated. 3. It contains a chaos item. Roll a d4. 1. A collar of corn. 2. A rod of command. 3. Staff of Nurgle. 4. A globe of change. The item can be taken by the champion if he follows the appropriate chaos power. 4. The sarcophagus contains a decayed and harmless skeleton clutching a randomly determined chaos weapon. 5. The sarcophagus contains a single randomly determined magic item. 6. The sarcophagus contains a demon weapon. The champion must decide whether to take the weapon or quickly close the lid of the sarcophagus, leaving it to lie imprisoned for another age. If the champion takes the weapon, determine the type of demon randomly. Why do I like this scenario so much that I'm giving it my gold standard? Well, first off, it just oozes cool and it feels visceral in a way that modern scenarios often don't. What are we doing this battle? Are we fighting over some abstract points on the ground? No. There is a temple and in it there is a sarcophagus, and the first person to lift its lid is going to get halfway to their next chaos reward. And when the sarcophagus gets opened, something incredibly exciting is going to happen, something that no one can predict, and even just imagining the different outcomes already feels very, very cool. It of course leaves loads of unanswered questions. How far away do the warbands start? No idea. How does the undead champion behave? Who knows? The GM controls him, of course, but when does he take his turn? Immediately at the end of the round? I don't know. If I have 2 weapons already, do I need to drop one to claim the chaos weapon? It's questions like this which is why a GM was needed to run it. There are also a few other problems with its design. Is it just going to be a mosh pit in the center of the battlefield? Yeah, probably. Will it get a bit samey after playing it a few times? Yep, probably that too. Would it suck to get the chaos item for the wrong patron? Most definitely. These are important things to identify because it's going to help us improve our own design. So what are some of the ingredients I see here that I can use in my own designs? Well, some of it is the set dressing. The scenario is evocative and visceral and cool. Having the warbands fight over real objects like sarcophaguses and being able to lift off the lid to see what's beneath. These are real, tangible objects and experiences I want to give my players. The second ingredient is something I like to call a turning point. There is a moment when the battle will be flipped on its head. What will happen when the lid is lifted? No one can predict the outcome, and that feels so exciting. Fantasy author Brandon Sanderson talks about an idea of promises and payoffs being the building blocks of a compelling story. A good narrative scenario should tell a compelling story, and having something like a turning point, a lifting of the lid, is an excellent way to place a promise and a payoff at the center of your design. So this is my gold standard. I'm going to try and create narrative scenarios that have a similar sort of vibe to this one. That for me is classic Warhammer with a modern twist, something that I have reiterated throughout this series as being one of the hallmarks I want for Black Death City. And this isn't the last we'll see of sarcophaguses too. One is going to crop up in my own design, which I will showcase later. But first we have a few more things to cover. So at the start of the video, I said there were lots of different considerations that arise when designing scenarios. How big should the battlefield be? How far away should the forces start? how many turns should the battle be. I'm going to cover my decisions on these now, but I want to stress again that there is no one solution and the right path will differ from game to game. But hopefully hearing me talk through my thought process will help you design your own game too. Even if you disagree with my takes, I hope that I can inspire you in your own design. So the overarching feeling that I have is a good narrative scenario needs room to breathe and room to let stories emerge. So the first thing I decided was to lift the turn limit. My scenarios will not have a fixed number of turns. I will use mechanics to help bring the game to a close and discourage castling, and I will aim for games to come to a natural close in around 10 turns, but some battles may go on for longer. Can you imagine playing that Realm of Chaos scenario under a time limit? There's a bitter struggle between both sides. The Sarcophagus lid is finally cast off, the undead Chaos Champion emerges ready for vengeance, and the battle ends. So that's the first thing I decided. The scenarios will not have a fixed turn limit. I want to give them room to breathe. But it's not just turn limit that can stifle the narrative. Let's look at the battlefield size now. For Black Death City, I'm going to go with 2 recommended sizes. 3 foot by 3 foot, which is the non-GW standard for skirmish games now, and 44 inches by 30 inches, which is also not the GW standard, but it is 2 Warcry or Kill Team boards pushed together. I want to keep a small footprint, but at the same time really maximize the space I have. So what I'm going to do is design all of my scenarios to be played across diagonals. This increases the distance between the 2 warbands dramatically. Using Pythagoras' theorem for the first time since leaving school, that gives us a distance of 50.91 inches or 53.25 inches. So surprisingly similar for both board sizes, and importantly much larger than the 36 inches lining up would give us. If a standard deployment range is 9 inches from your corner, or your entry point as they will be called, this means the closest fighters will start 32 to 33 inches apart, and the first few turns will be spent jockeying into position. I don't see this as boring, I see this as immersive. I love thinking about player experiences when I'm designing games, and not all experiences need to be combat related. This gives players a chance to experience running through shadowed ruins, scurrying up ladders, and trying to reach vantage spots before the enemy closes in. So this idea of giving the battle, the warbands, and the narrative room to breathe was the big motivator in my design choices. I don't think these are necessarily the right choices for every wargame, but even if you're designing a more tournament-focused game, I would suggest you give some thought to this as well. Okay, for the final part of this video, I want to showcase one of the scenarios I've designed for Black Death City, which is based upon everything we have discussed so far. For the final game, I'm thinking of 9 to 11 scenarios in total, and I will use a 2d6 roll and its distribution curve to shape the likelihood of each occurring. Towards the center will be 3 core scenarios on the 6, 7, and 8 rolls, and each of these is going to have a different win condition. One is based on collecting treasure tokens, one is a deathmatch, and one is vying for control. But instead of fighting over objective markers, it will be table quarters, as I think this gives players freedom to approach it both aggressively and stealthily. Beyond that, you start to get more weird and wacky scenarios, with the 2 and the 12 roll in particular being something a little crazy. All the scenarios will be on a 2-page spread, with a twist table on the second page to heighten the narrative, and I'll be trying to get these Realm of Chaos vibes in. So I want the victory conditions to feel thematic and visceral, and I want the twists to present turning points where the story of the battle can take a dramatic turn. Okay, let's look now at one of the scenarios for Black Death City. This one is called The Chapel, and it's on the weirder side of the spectrum. Here lies once hallowed ground, a chapel dedicated to one of the city's many saints, now destroyed and its roof caved in. It may have been stripped of all treasures long ago, but the only way to find out is to first venture inside. For this battle, the players will need to construct a chapel in the center of the battlefield, which is an area 12 inches by 16 inches in size. Warbands start in opposite corners. Each warband is broken up into 3 equally sized battle groups, with one random group starting on the battlefield. The other groups will arrive later in the battle and might come on from your battlefield edges or your opponents if your roll is lucky. This will be something that is baked into all scenarios. There are 3 treasure tokens placed inside, and players can either win by escaping with 2 or more treasure tokens or taking down 8 enemy fighters, meaning it will be pointless to castle in your corner. So there's a few interesting things here. I like that the battlefield feels like a real place. It is not abstract. You are fighting over a ruined chapel and it's there in the center of the board. I also like that there are 2 avenues to victory, but the real fun happens with the twist table on the second page. This is where I hope to not only bake in variety and make this scenario fun to play multiple times, this is where I want to get in some turning points, some ways the battle can be flipped on its head and make for an experience the players will never forget. The twist table here uses a D3. The first result is a hidden trove. The chapel seems to have survived the worst of the destruction of the city. You spy the gleam of gold and silver amidst the wreckage. This is the simplest and it increases the treasure tokens from 3 to 5, something I could never do easily in a game like Warcry with its cards. The other two results are much more expansive. 2. Desecrated ground. The statues have been torn down, their eyes gouged out. All other effigies have been burned to ash. This place seems thirsty for blood. This one has a turning point. The first time a fighter is taken down inside the chapel, a table is rolled on to see what this unwitting blood sacrifice has awakened. On a 1 or 2, there is just a bit of atmospheric rain, but I don't like writing effects that do nothing if I can help it, so there is a chance the rain can worsen from there on out. On a 3, it's straight to heavy rain. This is a call to realism. It reduces the visibility to 12 inches and makes black powder weapons more likely to clog as water seeps into the ammunition bags. On a 4, grass sprouts. The temple may have been desecrated, but the saint's presence lingers still. Fighters will get healed as they stay in the chapel. On the flip side, demons and undead take damage instead. This is something I do a lot in the rules. Demons and undead take damage from holy effects. On the flip side, they get to ignore curses or unholy effects. On a 5, it is blood frenzy. This sends everybody a little wild, adding 1 to the attacks of fighters while they are within the chapel grounds. And lastly, number 6 is thunderclaps. The skies above swirl with coiling black clouds, and for a moment, time seems to stop. This one ends the round immediately, so fighters that haven't activated lose their turn. It also resets the offering, so next time blood is spilled, you get to roll on the table once again. Once this game goes live, there will be 2 players out there somewhere that play this battle and have thunderclap 3 or 4 times in a row, and it should make for a crazy story. So that's the second twist, and I hope it gets this idea of a turning point across. There are treasure tokens which force the players into the chapel, but as soon as blood is spilled, there is something unexpected going to happen. On to the final twist. And I made this my remake of the Sarcophagus from the Realm of Chaos. If this twist is rolled, a sarcophagus is placed in the center of the chapel, and during the battle the fighters can try and force off the lid with a host of different outcomes. These outcomes range from the contents being long destroyed, unleashing a curse, finding a valuable coin purse within, or there being a valuable heirloom. It's perhaps not as wild and varied as the Realm of Chaos one, but as my game does not have a GM to smooth over the grey areas, I didn't want to have random NPCs rising out of the ground without explaining how that works. I'll keep that idea instead in my back pocket for another scenario, probably the Snake Eyes result on my scenario table that will pitch the warbands in a graveyard on the night of a full moon, where the second page can be used to detail the rules for NPCs in full. Alright, I think that's time to wrap up the video. So there is a look at one of the scenarios, the chapel, but also a look at how this twist system will work inside each scenario. So far I've found this twist system to be very flexible. It helps get some much needed variety into the scenarios, but it is also a tool for enabling turning points and creating these really rich narrative outcomes as a result. Let me share now a few other twists from other scenarios that I'm excited about. So in the scenario Street of Death, one of the defender's champions or leader becomes the hit, the target that the other warband needs to take down. Due to the twists, there is a chance the hit will start the battle as drunk as an eel, or perhaps they have a hidden tunnel that only they know about. Alternatively, the enemy might be lurking in the rafters above them, or they might have been tipped off and have some reinforcements arriving sooner rather than later. Another scenario is The Find, which is my take on Mordheim's Defend the Find, where a band of fighters need to defend a valuable building they have discovered. Here, some of the twists tell you the story of the building. For example, it might be an old debt collector's house, which increases the number of treasure tokens it holds. Another twist is the barricaded holdout. The fighters have had time to batten down the hatches, and the player gets to place extra wall sections to represent this. But perhaps the most memorable twist will be the one where the building starts on fire. It begins small, but as it grows, it threatens to burn down everything inside if the players cannot get the loot out quick enough. So hopefully that gets you excited and gives you a taste of what to come. What I'm working towards now is getting the open playtest for Black Death City ready. I am aiming for there to be 4 factions in the open playtest to begin with, and then more will get added once the kinks are ironed out. So hopefully that will be the next video. If I can get the open playtest up and running by the end of June, I will at least feel like I have somewhat reached my initial target, which was to have the game completed by the end of that month. Please let me know what you thought of the video down in the comments below, and please remember to like and subscribe if you have not already. I would also love to know what your gold standard for scenarios are, be it match play, narrative play, or a system that pulls off both. So I'll leave a pinned comment down below where you can drop your answers. I chose Realm of Chaos Lost in the Damned as my narrative gold standard. For matched play, so Clents from 3rd edition 40k, that's one that immediately springs to mind. Inside the Age of Sigmar team, we always considered Border War to be one of the best Age of Sigmar scenarios. Also, I want to say a really big thank you to everyone who left questions on my last video. I was worried that I wasn't going to get any questions, and then you guys went above and beyond and sent in loads and loads of really good ones. I was putting together a video that answered them, but with this June deadline looming, I decided that I first need to refocus solely on Black Death City and just crunch through to the end of next month. So hopefully that means we'll be able to launch the open playtest of Black Death City sooner rather than later, and then once we're past that deadline I can hopefully do some videos going through some of those questions. So there's a lot of exciting things to look forward to in the not too distant future, but otherwise until next time, bye for now.